The resurrection of Jesus is a foundational belief for Christianity. But did it really happen? Join Dr. Bart Ehrman, New Testament and early Christian specialist, and Dr. Mike Lecona, New Testament scholar, as they debate, did the resurrection of Jesus really happen? Hosted by me, Megan Lewis, this day-long event promises to be the definitive discussion of a contentious topic. Use the Digital Hammurabi affiliate link to purchase your ticket and support the channel. I'll see you on April 9th. Dr. Bart Ehrman, thank you so much for joining me again. As ever, it's a pleasure to have you on Digital Hammurabi. We are here to talk about your upcoming debate with Dr. Mike Lecona about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which I am excited about, and I think a large proportion of our audience will probably be excited about as well. It's something we get asked about semi-regularly, and neither Josh nor I are New Testament or even Old Testament specialists, as it were. So I'm glad that you are here. I'm glad that we can help promote the debate a little bit. So you've argued in the past and will argue in this debate that the resurrection of Jesus did not, in fact, happen. What do you think is at stake in this argument?
I'll say, in my previous debates, I've been kind of cagey about it. And I've said that, in fact, what my argument has been, look, even if it happened, you can't show it happened historically. And so I haven't really staked it, although I'm thinking about doing it this time. It didn't happen. So what's at stake? Well, I'd say there's a lot at stake. There are over 2 billion people in the world today who worship Jesus. And the only reason they worship Jesus is because Jesus got raised from the dead. So if he didn't get raised from the dead, it sort of overthrows the faith of the world's largest religion and the one that has been in control of Western society since the 4th century, basically, 5th century. And so historically it would be huge. And it's since it's a personal faith, for people who believe, obviously it'd be enormous. But I think even for people who don't believe in the resurrection, it would be worth knowing whether this is the kind of thing that you can talk about historically. And so that's what I'm interested in dealing with in the debate.
So if we're looking then specifically at the evidence, what do you think is the most compelling evidence for the resurrection? Or is it, as far as you're concerned, there just isn't any that we can speak of?
Well, I think technically there's no historical evidence that you can give for a resurrection. I mean, you don't find historians of the ancient Near East or of 20th century Germany or of the whatever. You don't find historians talking about what God did one day. You don't. So in other words, you find sources that talk about what the gods are doing, what God is doing. But if you're reading about the Battle of the Bulge by a historian, it's not that God intervened and made sure one side would win. History doesn't work like that. And so, but if I had to say, if I were like inclined to believe in the resurrection, what would strike me as kind of important, something to say about it? I'd say the most important thing would be that there were people who believed they saw Jesus afterwards, who were convinced they saw him afterwards, and one of them was his brother. His brother apparently thought he got raised from the dead, and so that's interesting. I mean, I don't think it can be considered historical evidence because I don't think you can. I mean, it's not evidence. But it sure is interesting.
So would you then say that the best argument against the resurrection is that there just simply isn't evidence, or the best argument against believing in it is that there is no evidence really to go on?
No, I wouldn't say that, because I think there are a lot of people. I was a Christian when I knew you could not mount a historical argument for the resurrection. And so the fact you can't mount a historical argument for it is neither here nor there. What it means is that it's not something that's susceptible to historical proof. And that's true of most things that have happened in the past. I mean, the vast majority of things, there's no way to demonstrate because history just can't show. I mean, I can't show what you were thinking yesterday morning at 8:30. I mean, you thought something, but I have no access to it. There, trillions of things every day. There's no access to. There's no access to what God is doing in this world. But it doesn't mean He's not doing things. In other words, you don't have access to it. Against the resurrection, I mean, for one thing, you have to look at historical sources and what sources of information do we have. What you'd like for any historical event is lots of sources from near the time by people who are eyewitnesses that agree with one another and basically tell the same story. And you got these various kinds of things on your wish list as a historian, whether you're talking about Abraham Lincoln or Charlemagne or Julius Caesar. These are the things you'd like in your sources, and you just don't have those. What you've got with the Gospels are sources who are written by interested parties who are convinced that Jesus was raised from the dead, who tell stories that contradict each other. Decades later, living in different countries, speaking different languages based on oral traditions they've heard. I mean, these are not good sources. And the fact that they contradict each other in really significant ways, that doesn't help. So, what kind of evidence do you, for the greatest miracle that ever happened? Is that the kind of evidence you want?
Probably not. So what then is the consensus position among subject matter experts in the field of biblical studies? I'm assuming yours is not the outlying view when we talk about the resurrection.
Well, the problem with biblical studies is that biblical scholars often, are interested in historical events because they're interested in the life of Jesus and the life of the early church. And so they're interested in historical events, but they're not trained in history. They are almost all, the vast majority of New Testament scholars are Bible-believing Christians. Well, the vast majority are believing Christians, and a large chunk of that are Bible-believing evangelical Christians. And so if you ask what is the standard view among biblical scholars, it's that Jesus was raised from the dead. I mean, because that's why it's just the nature of the beast. Because most people become biblical scholars because they're really interested in the New Testament for personal reasons. So that would be the standard position.
Does that then change when we look at scholars of the wider historical context in which Jesus is purported to have lived?
It kind of depends. I mean, so if you look at the history of early Judaism, there are lots and lots of scholars of early Judaism, and Jews and Christians, and when they're actually doing their history, they don't talk about resurrections, Jesus's or anyone else's. That's part of the problem, is that Christian New Testament scholars who want to say that Jesus was raised from the dead use criteria to try and show that they don't apply to anyone else. It's not that it's possible that there are a bunch of resurrections and Jesus was one of them. No, this is the one.
This one, yeah.
And it's not really how you're supposed to do history. I mean, history gives equal claims to equal evidence. And so if you think Jesus was raised from the dead, you got accounts of other people being raised from the dead. Why not them?
So then if the majority of people who hold this viewpoints in academia are also practicing Christians, often practicing evangelical Christians, would you say that there are any who are not evangelical Christians who hold this view? Or is it intrinsically tied to...
No. Well, yeah, non-evangelical Christians, of course. I mean, if you're a Presbyterian and you're not an evangelical, most Presbyterians believe that Jesus was really raised from the dead. Some would say, well, it's not literally true. It means, X, Y, or Z, or, there's a spiritual resurrection of some kind. His body died, but his spirit lived on. You've got a range of things. But basically, most people who say that they don't think Jesus was raised from the dead, they normally don't identify as Christian. And so Christians would basically say he was raised. The issue, though, is for more mainstream scholars, mainline scholars, liberal scholars, critical scholars, historical scholars who are not evangelical, a lot of them will say, yeah, I do believe that, but no, I can't prove it historically. It's not a matter of proof. And a lot of people have religious reasons for saying that. There are a lot of scholars who come out of, say, the Lutheran tradition or various Protestant traditions who say you can't prove claims of faith. If you could prove claims of faith, it's no longer faith. Because then you've got historical proof.
You've got facts, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's fact contrary to the religion to think you can prove it.
So really, I suppose what we're talking about when we dive into these is issues of bias and how your own personal beliefs inform your scholarship, which is something that everybody, I won't say struggles with, but everybody has biases, conscious or unconscious, and they do inform how you look at everything, including the ancient world and including the texts that you work with. How important is it, do you think, to try and mitigate against bias, or is it even possible to mitigate against bias, or do you simply have to accept that it's there and try and do the best you can?
It certainly is possible to mitigate against bias, and I think we really need to try as hard as we can. There are ways that we'll not be able to do it, but there are some ways we can do it. And an example is what happens in the sciences. So, it's kind of a funny phenomenon that you get Christians who write Christian history, and so there's kind of a Christian history. But is there like a Jewish history of Christianity and a Buddhist history of Christianity and a Hindu? There is, but is it really history?
Mm-hmm.
Like with chemistry, in chemistry you don't have like Christian chemistry and Jewish chemistry and Buddhist chemistry or Hindu So, or a physicist in Iraq or in Iran is doing the same stuff as the physicist in China, doing the same stuff as the person in Japan, doing the same stuff as the person in India, same stuff as the person in Canada, same person. They're doing the same stuff because they've got beliefs and they got philosophical understandings, they've got religious understandings, they've got beliefs, but they don't let it affect their scientific research. Science has bracketed that, and so you have plenty of Christians who are biologists and chemists, but it doesn't affect their biology and chemistry. And I think history ought to be like that. That when you're doing history, you've got to have agreed upon assumptions for what you're doing, just like the biologists have. And if you start saying, well, the only way to know what really happened in the past is if you believe in God, well, that's a theological statement. It's not a historical statement. I think you should do history by doing history based on assumptions that everybody shares. And that's why when Christians write histories of the Second World War, they might think that God is the one who made sure the Allies won, but they don't say it in their writings.
Thank you for that. One final question before we say goodbye. When we look at bias and we look at the understanding of history in the Old and the New Testament, something that is often leveled against secular academics or academics who do not hold to a Bible as factual truth position is that they are simply biased against the existence of the supernatural. Yeah. What would your response be to that?
That's a very common argument. I hear it all the time, that I personally have an anti-supernaturalist bias, or that other people like me do. And I think it's completely false, and I think it's demonstrably false. I can tell you why. I just think empirically, it's just completely false. I had these views of the resurrection when I was still a Christian. And so it wasn't because, and so I know lots and lots of historians who are Christian, but it doesn't affect their history. And so they can believe whatever they want. And so there's no bias against the supernatural. It's just that they recognize that when they're doing history, they're following a discipline. It's just like saying, historiography has rules. And it's kind of like basketball has rules. I mean, basketball has rules. Or chess. Take chess, since we're doing an international thing here. So chess has rules, and you can't just kind of make up new rules when you want to play the game. You can't decide that the bishop isn't going to go diagonally. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it go some other ways. You can't do that. You're playing this game, and history is a very serious game, but there's still rules. And you might have beliefs and philosophies and religion in your head, but it can't affect your history if you're trying to do history. So that's why. So I don't think it's an anti-supernaturalist bias. I think it's just deciding I'm going to play chess, whatever I think about what the bishops ought to do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and for your answers. And I am very much looking forward to seeing you for the debate.
Okay, thanks. Thanks so much.